Hey everybody, Orange Podcast Bad, episode 13. We are here. We got Paul here, of course, best co-host you could possibly have on a podcast, and we got Steve with 3 Tier Services with us tonight. Thanks so much, Steve. Good to talk to you. So what is 3 Tier Services?
So that's my business. I've been doing what I do for since '99, roughly, maybe earlier. I'd have to look, but I started out running training centers, use of force training centers, self-defense martial arts, law enforcement training, private security training, corrections training, and then over time, clients or people started asking me to do things like independent private investigations on use of force, self-defense cases. That turned into lawyers asking me to help them litigate either civil or criminal self-defense cases or use of force cases.
Okay.
And then that turned into I had some requests to do some private security services, so that's what I do.
Incredible. So I had an idea. I wanted to run something by you. So Paul, being a former LT, LEO, Miami Vice style type of guy, fighting the war on drugs. I've got you from 3 Tier Services. Steve, thanks. Listen. The internet gets weird, and they can cause themselves problems just by doing this. We can get into that at a later point, but let me start with this story. So the story, shocking. 20-year-old Destiny Scott, 270 pounds, is accused of brutally attacking an 11-year-old girl, slamming her and hitting her with a metal part of a slide. The child cried, "Stop, stop," while Scott allegedly taunted, "Now what?" So the setting, if you watch the video, it's a child's playground, not for toddlers. This is for 10 to 12, 15, 14, 15-year-olds. It's a 3-story tall thing. And so the big girl's just on top beating the 11-year-old. Here's where it gets interesting to me, though, is that people go online. So somebody quote posts it, a pretty large account, says, "Honest question. If this was your kid and you walked up on this, would you have fired a round into her large ass? I ask myself that as a concealed carry kind of mom." What are you guys' thoughts?
I'll let your co-host go first.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm trained in the use of force matrix, and going straight to guns is usually not the best choice. But like Steve said earlier, if you're overpowered and you're a 105-pound soccer mom in a minivan, and there's no way that you're going to get Destiny off of it, you can't, just jump on her back and try to get her off. But I also have some concerns about launching pew pew projectiles up into the stratosphere to try to get her off. Unless the child is near death and there's nothing else to do, that's a deadly force is a last resort. And so your best bet is to call 911, and they're 4 or 5 minutes away when seconds count. And so you've got to be able to recognize what your abilities are. So if I was there, for example, no problem. I'm going to climb up there and I'm going to grab her and get her off of her and do whatever I have to do to stop this girl getting beat up. But if you're a soccer mom, that's probably not one of your options. But I would hesitate for her to draw down and just go to deadly force on this, because she's going to have problems in court. Even though there's a weight difference and a height, and they they take that into consideration. And as an aside, that's always been my problem with female police officers, right? It's always been my issue is just naturally on a shift. If one of your female officers goes on a traffic stop, you automatically roll that way. You just roll that way and, make sure everything's going okay and stuff like that. So even though this is different, I just hate to see people in the comments talk about going straight to guns. That's a big deal, dude. And if you've never done it, it stays with you forever. There's just so much that goes along with deadly force. Don't you think, Steve?
Oh, of course. When I'm training people, I make a very clear distinction between non-deadly force and deadly force, right? And what's in between, less lethal. So, you start launching projectiles in public, it's a deal. And there's a lot of things we could talk about there. However, I would just want to go back to the totality of this situation. And all we know by the story is you have an adult female that's very big hitting a 11-year-old who's way younger and most likely way smaller, way weaker.
Yeah, defenseless.
Defenseless. And, you take somebody that size that is even just hitting them in the head, or if they're banging their head against a hard surface, that could kill them.
Yeah.
It happens all the time. When I've had many, many cases over the years where somebody has hit somebody in the head one time, they get knocked out, they fall, hit their head, they get a subdermal hematoma, they die, and then that person is charged with manslaughter or homicide, murder.
Yeah.
So, that situation, just those facts alone, is a dire situation. The threat is right now. The threat is happening right now.
Yeah.
So, to say, oh, hey, you should just start using your gun, you could make an argument that you were justified in doing that because there was a disparity of age and size, right? However, it really depends, like you were talking about. What's your skill level? Have you trained?
Right.
Who's around the area? What is your size? What are your capabilities physically? Correct? So I think when you talk about these kind of things, I always say to people in trainings, it depends. And I'm not talking about Joe Biden's underwear. I'm talking about the situation. It really just depends upon the totality of the situation and what you could reasonably justify when that scenario is being reviewed by objective people that weren't there, right? People defend themselves all the time with legitimate self-defense, and they still get arrested and charged, or they get civilly sued. So to just off the cuff say, I'm going to start firing, well, that tells me that person doesn't have much training, and they probably have not done any reality-based training. They probably have no threat assessment training, and they're going to probably have a hard time articulating how they came to that decision of the threat assessment.
Dude, that's such an important, that is so important, Steve, because you go to concealed carry class and they don't give you any at all real world scenarios. They don't train you in that. They train you in, you're going to do 40 rounds 3 times after you listen to a 2-hour lecture, and then you're going to get your concealed carry license. But if you go to one of those, state sanctioned programs, they don't give you, like I would interpret your company does, any real world scenarios about, when to engage deadly force and that kind of thing. The When I retired out of law enforcement, we've got reciprocity, here in Texas. I'm a firearms instructor, but none of my curriculum has any real world scenarios that you would be involved with to help, somebody who wouldn't normally carry a gun. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So, uh, literally, after a couple of cases helping attorneys in trial where people were criminally charged with self-defense and learning about what that's really like and what's at risk,
Mm-hmm.
it completely dismantled, and I went back to the drawing board on how I train people. And I get people all the time that will call and say, "Hey, like a friend of my wife's husband, he's had 5 buddies, and they called me last year, and they're like, 'Hey, we'd like to get some training.' I said, 'Okay, well, I need to know what your goals are, and what are you just wanting to shoot, or you conceal carry? Like,
Right.
what do you want, right?'"
What do you want? Yeah.
Yeah. So they said, "Well, we want some skill, and we want to be able to, conceal carry and that kind of thing." And I said, "Okay, well, I would like to meet with you guys. It won't cost you anything, and discuss specifics." And I said, "But I want you to know the very first training you're ever going to get, which for me is not on the range shooting. It's going to be at my training center, and you're going to go through a cognitive training, i.e. a lecture and PowerPoint on defending self-defense. Because if you don't know these things, all I'm doing is setting you up for to be unsuccessful, you know?"
Yep.
And he said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "Look, I've been doing this a long time, and there is a lot of trainers out there that will just teach you hard skills, right? Your hard skills.
Yeah.
The problem is you need soft skills, and you need to know what you're getting into in case
Right.
you
Yeah.
get
Oh,
charged,
yeah.
especially if they charge you with homicide. Most self-defense homicide cases, you're looking at 45 to life. And a lot of people don't even understand that there's only certain attorneys that can handle that level of a charge.
That level of, yeah.
And they don't understand that you may not get bail. You may be remanded to trial. So then what are you going to do? How do you support your family? And they also don't understand that to get the right attorney, if you don't qualify for public defense, which most of the people that I train would never qualify for it, you're going to need 300 to 500 grand up front to get that attorney, and that won't even get you to trial most likely. So, I have a 6-hour class. Sometimes it can go as long as 8, just on those concepts, and how to choose your training, how to make your training courtroom relevant, right?
Yeah.
I teach a class on how to fight to get to your gun, because I've told people time and time again, listen, and I wish I would have kept track years ago on an Excel spreadsheet, but I didn't figure this would go that part of my, it wouldn't get this big and go this long, right? So I tell people all the time, what you got to understand is 9 out of 10, and it might even be as high as 9.5, self-defense cases are against somebody in some way, and it starts out non-deadly force. So you got to be able to go hands-on, and then you may need to fight to get to your gun, right? But if you think the gun is the solution to everything, that's like a carpenter who only carries a hammer. They're going to see every problem as a nail, if that makes sense. So I just refuse to do that to people. If they're not willing to go through that training, I won't train them. I'm not doing it.
Absolutely.
That's a great point. And to tell you honestly, I wish there were because there's dozens and dozens of folks out there doing that kind of work. And I just wish there were more that had your outlook on things, because that's what it really comes down to.
Well, I'll tell you, I wish I would have learned and had those experiences sooner, because I did people early on in my career a disfavor. And you know what? Those guys ended up, they're like, no, you're too serious. We're not going to take training with you. And I said, that's fine. There's plenty of trainers here in Idaho that they'll teach you hard skills. However, if you use those hard skills and you're arrested, your attorney's probably going to call me for help as an expert.
Right. Yeah.
Right? And, here's the thing. When I train people, my goal is not to proselytize them or indoctrinate them. It's to teach them how to think, how to choose training, how to be a critical thinker in their lifestyle and what they need. It's not to say, hey, a gun's for everyone. I've had people literally walk out of a training and say, you know what? I don't want to carry.
Yeah, this isn't for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I had a neighbor carries 24/7 in his house, at work, because he's his own boss. He's a contractor. He took a class from me. 2 days after it, he came across the street and he said, hey, I want to thank you. I'm like, well, sure, happy to have you in the class. And he goes, no. He goes, I want to thank you. And I go, what's up? And he said, after going through your class, I realized I had to think like I wasn't carrying a gun. Right? My mindset was, because I have a gun. And he goes, no, that's how you get in trouble.
That's how you get in trouble, bro. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so on this story, right, we can go a lot of ways with it, but my first observation, and I had some banter back and forth in the comment section, and they were all beating me up, and they're like, oh, well, I'm going to shoot first and ask questions later. I'm saving the 11-year-old kid. Okay, great. No, I think you're on the right place. And I'm trying to get them to focus on something. I was like, is there something else you could have done? And I had lots of comments like, well, if I'm the mom, I'm just going to, okay, listen, I'm asking a specific question to try and get you to a specific answer. And nobody could get there. So I finally put it out there. I said, would you walk up to her and say, hey, fat chick, get off my kid first? Not a single one of them. Then I got comments underneath it that still said no. I would not ask. I would just fire first. And I'm like, do you know what you're firing? Would you shoot through the fat chick into your kid? And no comment.
And that really comes back to the use of force matrix, because that's what's going to come up in trial. What things did you do before going to deadly force?
Right.
Did you challenge them, with your voice? Did you go hands-on? Did you use any kind of taser or nightstick or, blah, 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 whatever? Did you do all that before you went to deadly force? If you just drove up in your Dodge Caravan, got out of the car and unholstered and started, pew, pew, pewing up into the monkey bars, that's not going to bode well for you in court.
Well, and they all I guess the comment sections, they're all like, well, I'll be able to tell the judge, or and I was like, you don't get the chance. Steve could explain this better. You don't get a chance to tell your story. You got an attorney that basically are jockeying for sympathy from a jury. You don't get a chance to tell your story.
You don't.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have to get people to understand this all the time, because they watch way too much TV,
right?
And they've never sat through a self-defense murder trial, or any trial for that matter. Look, there's rules of evidence, and the rules of evidence books in every state are they're massive. And there's going to be pre-trial motions and decisions made about what evidence is going to be allowed in and what is not. And you're
Right.
not going to be able to get on the stand and just narrate your story. It's going to be through questions, cross-examination,
Yep.
and evidence that is allowed in. So, I've been in working with many families, and they're watching the trial, and they're pissed because they didn't have any idea it was going to be like that. Nobody explained it to them, and they're like,
nobody
"What?"
explained it. Right. Exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
I've had to explain that to many families to get them to try to calm down, right? And so that's the first thing. The second thing is when you're in a high stress critical incident, you may not even remember everything. Dr. Alexis Artwell, I haven't talked to her in years, but she peer reviewed my training on survival stress and survival psychology because she writes about that. She has studied officers, police officers. Her husband was a high ranking cop, I think, in the state police in Oregon. I don't know if she's still in Oregon, but anything written by her is spot on. Well, she did a study with, I can't remember how many cops. I want to say it was either 100 or 50. I think it was 100. Maybe it was 150. I don't know. I have to look. I've got the study actually, and I send it to attorneys all the time. And so many of those cops did not even remember emptying their gun. They had no memory, right? So if you think that as an untrained person or a person that even has, half the training, that your brain isn't going to be affected by a high stress situation through survival stress,
yeah.
you haven't had enough training.
Yep.
You're missing master keys that you need in your toolbox to make your use of force courtroom relevant.
Right.
And the investigators that are investigating this stuff, it's not like CSI. I've seen CSI people on crime scenes where it's 3 or 4 people that are dead or whatever. You get in a single one-on-one use of force or even 1-on-2, it's going to be a couple of investigating officers, maybe one detective. There's no CSI.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Massad Ayoob is a great guy, very well known, expert trainer. When he talks about this stuff, he has always said, look, because of the rules of evidence, you need to be able to point out evidence that police might miss, because they do miss evidence. You need to be able to point out witnesses, etc. Right. So.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, back in the 80s, I was on a DEA task force in South Florida. We were doing at least a search warrant every day or two. Just, what I mean? Just really kicking the bucket and just knocking shit down. And we got into a shootout, or I got into a shootout with a member of the Jamaican posse. And I swear to God, Steve, I thought I had 11 rounds in my SIG, and I thought I hit him 11 times. And that sumbitch still went out the window and ran around to the front yard, before he died. And I had no recollection. I remember going into the bedroom. I remember him there, and he had the largest revolver I had ever seen. I'm like, it was probably a Model 10, but it looked like a Ruger Red Hawk to me. And we were, you know what I mean? And, I thought, I'd go to the gym 3 times a week, go to the range, we were on a DEA task force. We were the, bad mofos, back in the 80s in South Florida. And I tell you, I I thought I missed him every shot. I thought I missed him because he still went out the window and ran around to the front yard, and then he dropped in the front yard. It was because nobody told him he was shot.
Right.
But I didn't know that at the time. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
man. And so the other part of that was the walk it off generation in law enforcement.
Yeah.
My lieutenant's like, dude, you better be at roll call Monday, dude. We got work to do. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, back in those days, I learned later on when I started doing what I was doing, and working with officers. I got a year-long training contract with the SWAT team, and I was working with them on stuff they couldn't get at the academy. Right, that was the only reason.
Yeah.
And those guys taught me a lot. And here's the thing. Your body is going to go through a process of adrenaline, epinephrine, endorphins, etc. Your heart rate is going to be through the roof.
Sure.
If you've never practiced tactical breathing, you're going to have rapid, shallow breathing, which is not good for you under stress. You're going to lose fine motor skills, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's a whole class on that. Even once you learn that, if you haven't gone through any conflict simulation training, reality-based training where you're put under some stress, correct?
Yeah.
You're gonna have a hard time managing that and understanding it, right?
Yeah.
And law enforcement, unfortunately, historically, has been slow to respond to officers' needs of training.
Absolutely, dude. So I went to training my training was at Glencoe, like everybody in Florida and Georgia and, along the Eastern Seaboard, everybody went to Glencoe. Everybody got the same training and stuff, but none of the things that you're talking about, that obvious your company does, we didn't have any of that. It was just, you're in a shoot house, you're doing you do scenarios, you do dry fire, you do night fire, you do all this kind of stuff, but they don't talk to you about any of that stuff, when you get into a real firefight. So, the 11 rounds I dumped on this guy, 7 of them hit him.
Well, the Miami-Dade shootout really put the heat on law enforcement to make some changes in training.
Jesus,
and I actually have the FBI forensic study breakdown of that incident.
Do you really?
Yeah. And, initially they were saying, oh, these guys have to be on cocaine or this and that and this and that.
Yeah.
Because they were shooting them and they weren't stopping, right?
Yeah.
They were still killing FBI guys. Nope. Stone cold sober, nothing in their system. It was pure adrenaline, willing to live. So
natural point of aim. Yep.
Yeah. And the other problem was they weren't hitting anything vital, right? They were hitting non-vital spots on their body.
Yeah.
Well, then, listen to this case. There was two cops. I don't remember the state. All I remember is the story. They chased some, I don't know if they were bank robbers or what, but they basically chased 2 bad guys up into an apartment building with no way to get out up above. They're in a shootout. They're in a stairwell. These guys are in a hallway. Well, everybody dies, including the 2 officers.
Mm.
And when they went to investigate this, they found that they were state troopers. They found that while they were in this shootout and that this is back then when they were carrying 357 revolvers, no semi-autos.
Yep.
They were ejecting their empty cases into their hand and putting them in their pocket while they're in a shootout.
Because that's why they towed them at the range. Yeah.
Yes. They had to do that at the range because somebody had slipped on some casings and there was a work comp claim.
Yep.
So how you train is how you're going to do it.
Right.
So if you're not training under stress and basing on reality, what really happens when the shit hits the fan, you're not going to be able to perform.
Yep. Yeah, there was that Boston bank robber shootout, from the 70s. That you see the guy, he has a misfire on his auto pistol, and he raises his hand in the middle of the shootout because that's what you're supposed to do on the range. Hey, I got a misfire, and the guy's, doing this, and he ended up getting shot. He didn't get killed, but he got shot.
I was at Survival Week. Caliber Press does that.
Do they still do that?
Yeah. So it's a week long, and I went down to the one in Vegas, and on one of the days there was a training where we were working on if somebody has a gun on you, how to take that away as safe as you could be, right? I mean, it's still going to be dangerous, but well, it was really interesting because the guy that created this, he said, when we first did this training, what we were doing was I'm taking the gun and then I'm giving it back so I can do it again. Repetition, right?
Yeah,
that actually happened. They had a cop take a gun away from a bad guy that was holding a gun on him. He gave it back to him. He gave it back. And the guy was so shocked, he dropped the gun. He like, you just gave it back to me? Like, it freaked him out, right? So it still worked out okay. But then they changed that training. They said, nope. This guy goes, you take it, and then you go to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, dude.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Unbelievably incredible.
I love that Caliber Press stuff. Those guys back in my era, which was the 80s and 90s, they were the hot shit, doing that. Yeah. Yeah,
they're still, their books. I just got the new, a couple years ago, I got their new Street Survival book, and, those are good. That's their second edition. But their stuff is good because it's based on reality.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Right. So we've had a conversation before about this. I've had it with each of you at a different point in time. You put a sign up on your fence post, right? That says, "I only shoot 3 days a week," but then you actually have to do that, and now they've got evidence against you that promised you would shoot 3 days a week. Does that cause a problem when you go into court, even though it was, unauthorized entry and, right? Like, depending on the state, it could have a castle doctrine, things like that.
Who are you asking?
Let me start with Steve.
So this is what I tell people based on what I've seen in court over the years. First, they got to understand that if a prosecutor thinks something can be used against you to get a conviction, they will use it. Whatever it is. If you have a sign up that they believe they can manipulate a jury with to convict you on a charge using self-defense, they will do it.
Yeah.
I read about a case. I did not work on this case. I just read about it. There was a guy that shot a guy. It was a white guy, shot a black guy. They executed a search warrant on his house. He had saved all his targets over the years. Well, they were silhouette targets. The exact same one that officers use. He was buying them online. And they took those targets and made them evidence. And in opening statements, the prosecutor said, this guy's been training to kill black people for years.
So the targets were black and not blue.
Right, they were silhouette.
It was
black.
Pre-blue, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I could talk for hours about stuff I've seen prosecutors do with stuff like that. That's why I'm very clear with people when I train them. Don't put stupid signs up. Don't have stupid stuff engraved on your firearms. Don't have stupid shirts. Don't have stupid hats. Like, you know, my 1911 is faster than 911, whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of humorous pro 2A stuff that, yeah, if they think they can use it against you, they'll do it.
Yeah, my personal use 1911, I had engraved Ghetto Blaster on it, and I sold it about 10 years ago.
Well, somebody's got it. Well, so that brings me back to the whole point of why I started this thing, right? So somebody proposes a question about 2A. I want to use my 2A. And everybody goes online and publicly admits what they would first do, the first instinct they would do. And I said, if this happens to you, you now have this in a public forum that it's going to be brought against you in a court of law. And they were, I don't care. I don't care. I was like,
well, look, the reason they say I don't care is because they don't know. You don't know what you don't know. Like, they don't know how bad it is to be civilly sued or criminally charged. They don't know, right? All they know is what some guy taught in a class that doesn't know either, has no clue, just teaching hard skills.
Yeah. Right.
And I get it. I mean, I have other instructors that say, well, you're kind of anti 2A. And I go, no, if you want to buy a gun and own one, great. But if you're an idiot and you use it in a stupid way, you should be held accountable, and you probably will be. So, it's really unfortunate that so many gun owners, they go get their concealed carry. And in some states, you just have to have a basic safety class, right? And there's no time, there's no shooting required, anything, nothing about what the laws are or how they work or nothing. And then they don't do anything else. They're just done. And they carry a gun. That is their right. And I'm not saying that right should be denied. But that's not smart. That's not being smart. Gun owners need to be smart because it's a serious thing. And until you're aware of how serious it is and what can happen to you, even if you just pull a gun. I can't tell you how many cases I've worked on. I just talked to an attorney, what's today? Today's Saturday. I just talked to an attorney Wednesday, and he has a client that pulled a gun, and he's looking at a felony, well, 2 felonies. Yeah. And he's looking at 15 years in prison, maybe 25. And here's the scenario. A guy was road raging him from behind. The guy pulled up around him and got in front. They both take the exit off the interstate, and there's a red light. So the guy that is now behind the guy that was doing the road rage pulled up alongside him and pointed a gun at him. So, and it was a guy with a 3-year-old kid in the car. That guy calls the police. That guy leaves. The police find him. He admits that he has a gun in his car, but he says, I did not show it to him. I did not use my gun. And the officer's like, well, can I see your gun? Yeah. Shows him the gun. He said, so you didn't even show him your gun, but he described your gun to a T?
Wow.
Like color, everything. It was a revolver, blah, blah, blah. And the guy's like, all right, okay, I lied. I did pull my gun out, but I didn't point it at him. So the attorney sends me the report and stuff And I'm like, I call him up and I said, hey, dude, you, you need to have a conversation with your client because he lost his innocence.
Really?
He lost his innocence. And he goes, yeah. And he lied. And I said, look, if he's going to try to go to court and tell a judge or a jury, I pulled the gun because I thought my life was in danger right then. People who believe their life is in danger are not going to do what he did. They're not going to pull up alongside that guy, right?
Of course they're going to try to get away. Yeah.
Yeah. They're not. They probably wouldn't even take the same exit, and they're going to call the police.
Yeah.
So I said, you better have a serious talk with your client. I go, what is there a plea offer? And they said, yeah. He said, yeah. 2 years probation, this, that, the other thing, down to a misdemeanor. And once he completes probation, he gets his gun rights back. And I said, you better tell him to take that deal. I can't help you. No one that does what I do can help him or you. Matter of fact, we would probably hurt your case more than help it on cross.
Yeah.
So what's the percentage from your experience of that happening? Whether it's a brandishing or showing the gun, like where they get a lawyer and they're like, I'm going to be fine, and then they call an expert like you, and all of a sudden they find out, holy shit, I'm not going to be fine because they didn't learn right about the laws.
Yeah, well, it's not just the laws. It's look, you got to have some training in threat assessment. If you don't have any training in threat assessment, you're not going to know the appropriate response, right? And there are cases that you could reasonably, this is a legal term. I'm not a lawyer, but this is what they use in court, that you can make a case that you had reasonable belief that your life was in jeopardy right now. And you went from nothing to deadly force. The cases like that do happen, right? But if I did a professional guesstimate ballpark, I'd probably review 4 brandishing cases or unlawful use of a weapon cases a year, and maybe take half of them. Because the other ones, I'm like, look, I can't. You don't want someone like me on the stand. It's going to torpedo your case if I'm being honest and ethical, which I would be. Now, having said that, to just expand this topic, because a lot of people are told, hey, if you can display your firearm and end something peaceably, dude, I've heard instructors say this. You can do that. Well, that's not really actually true.
No, it's not.
And here's the other thing. Let's say that was true. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you always should, in a self-defense scenario. That's why I tell people, look, the Nike defense is the best defense. If you can get the hell out of there safely, go. Get out.
Yeah.
Just go. There's no ego here. Can I tell you about this one case, Sean?
Absolutely.
So years ago, I was training a family, and this is before I had a turnaround. It was early on. I had done a couple cases, but I was doing trainings for them 2 times a month out on their property. And I did have a thing right then that, you had to come to defending self-defense, the non-shooting course, the kind of stuff we're talking about, right? Well, their daughter lived up in Washington, up outside of Everett, Washington. She was a paramedic and a National Guard girl. Well, young lady. And she came down one weekend to visit, and they were like, well, can she shoot with us, blah, blah, blah. And I said, no, she hadn't gone through, that class. Man, they wouldn't let it go. So I finally let her come and shoot. And I said, look, the next time you're in town, if I'm doing this class, I will let you know you need to come to it. Okay, she promised me. Well, she never did. A year later, the parents call me, and they're like, hey, we got a problem. Our daughter has been charged with 2 felonies for brandishing a gun. And I'm like, oh man. They're like, can you help her? And I said, well, will she talk to me? And they're like, oh yeah, she'll talk to you. So I talked to her, get her story, her narrative. And I said, look, I'm going to tell you a couple things. I'm not telling you this to make you feel dumb, but you never just pick any random attorney out of the phone book or offline or whatever, right? You need to know the right person.
Yeah.
I said, there's only one guy up there that I know. He's the guy. I don't know him personally. I've never talked to him, but I know him because of what I do. I said, the only thing I can do for you is to call his office, see if he'll take my call, and see if I can get him to take your case. I was shocked. I call, I get right in to talk to him, like first phone call. Like that's not normal. Yeah. We talk and he goes, oh yeah, I'll take that case all day long. The prosecutor up here is out of control. And he goes, I'll even try to get some of her money back, but I'm going to have to charge her a little bit. But yeah, I'm going to help this girl. Because the problem was if she got convicted, she would lose her job as a paramedic and she'd be kicked out of the National Guard. It wasn't even a week that guy had that case and he got the DA to drop the whole thing. And here's what he did. He pulled the criminal history of these 4 guys, okay, that were in a car, took the criminal history over to the prosecutor's office and said, yeah, here you go, see in court. Who do you think any judge or jury is going to believe? A National Guard female paramedic or these 4 jokers?
Yeah.
Nobody had done a criminal background because here's what happened. She was driving home late one night, rural road, no 2-lane, no lights, no nothing. Car 4 dudes start road raging her from the rear. Then they pull up alongside her and try to force her to pull over. That's when she pulled the gun. Well, they took off. She goes home. If I remember, it was like an hour and a half later, a state trooper shows up and he asked her about this and she says yes, blah, blah, blah. So they charged her. But they didn't look into these other guys, right?
Wow.
So this is where I teach something that's very different. Massad Ayoob teaches it. Andrew Branca, he's a lawyer out of Colorado. I use his books in all my first 2 trainings. Everybody's got to get the book. And it's all about this stuff. He's a lawyer. That's all he's done is self-defense stuff. He actually has an instructor program. I went through that a long time ago. And we say, look, if you pull a firearm and you don't have to use it and it ends the situation, now you have a race to the phone. You have to self-report. You got to call it in because whoever calls in first is typically seen as the victim.
Yep.
And every time someone that I've worked with that has done that in self-defense that has not called, they've been charged. Everybody that did call, they were not charged.
They were not charged. Yep.
Right. But I have people say, well, you're not supposed to talk to the cops. And I'm like, look, self-defense is different. This isn't a drug charge. This isn't them accusing you of theft or whatever. You're in a situation where it's an affirmative defense. You're saying, yeah, I did this, but I was justified. Well, you better be able to give them a little bit of information to convince them that you were justified. And if you just say, I'm not talking, they're probably going to arrest you. Yep. Now you've just triggered a very complicated, expensive problem.
Well, don't you think some of that comes from way too many people watching YouTube and TikTok videos from these First Amendment auditors that go through First, Fourth, and Fifth Amendment? And whether they are actual lawful when they do this, these people are not going to be correct when they try to go through this process. They're not constitutional experts. They just saw some videos on YouTube.
Well, look, you're walking, in my training, that very first one people have to go through, I talk about this. And I explain, you're on a tightrope here, a very fine line of a tightrope. Okay. So you better get training on how to interface with first responders because you're going to have to call 911 or you should, right? You should. It's your choice not to. But if you don't, that's going to be a problem at some point.
Shame on you. Yeah.
Yeah. and what you say will be recorded, right? Then when medics show up, they may ask you questions, they may not. When the police show up, whoever called 911, they're gonna say, well, what happened here? Like, what the heck? Right? Well, if you say nothing, you better be able to afford a really good lawyer, if you've taken a life especially, and or be held over for trial and your family can survive, you got enough money. So I explain it like this. Just stick to the facts, the basic facts. Officer, I woke up. I don't know what time it was. My dogs were freaking out. Our alarm was going off. I told my wife to call 911. I had to go see what was going on, so I took my firearm and flashlight. This guy was standing in my living room. I told him not to move. The police are coming. I don't know this person. They came towards me. I fired my gun, and that's it. Well, Steve, how many times did you fire your gun? Where exactly was he standing? And they start getting into the weeds and the details. Shut up, because you don't know. You are under stress. Shut up. Officer, I'm not sure, this is a traumatic thing, and I tell them, if they keep pushing you, just say to them, hey, I know you get between 48 hours and 72 hours before you have to give a detailed statement, and you get to do that with a lawyer or your union rep, and I'm just asking for that same courtesy. If they say, hey, come down for questioning, am I under arrest? Like, you got to know your rights. If you decide to go, you better understand, I cannot tell you how many videos I've reviewed where they get somebody in the box and then they say, oh, hey, we got some stuff we got to handle. We'll be back as soon as we can get back.
Right.
I have literally seen people in the box 8, 12, 18 hours. I mean, they don't come back, and that's a tactic. That is a tactic that they're using to break you down. So, if that were me, and I'm like, yeah, I'll go down and talk to you, which I wouldn't do that. But let's say I did, and I'm in there for 2 hours, I would be like, you either charge me or let me go.
Yep.
So this is the stuff that people aren't getting enough of. Yeah, look, we need trainers teaching really good hard skills. But people, they should be up front and tell people, look, that's all I'm teaching you. There's other information you really need besides this, right? Again, it's your right. And if you want to do that, great. But just understand, you're not getting the whole picture.
Paul, did you have any follow-up there? Because we got about, 8 minutes left, and I wanted to ask about the Walker Anderson case, if there's any updates. Paul, did you have any update or anything before we go to that?
No, I don't. No, that's absolute spot on.
All right, so last time we were probably on live with different platforms, Steve. We were talking about the Walker Anderson case, and whatever I can dig on research, the case has just gone online silent, right? So nothing in the newspapers, nothing in publicly available court records where you don't have to pay money for access. It's just kind of gone dead, and I didn't know if you had any updates on where it's going.
Yeah, I do. So I've stayed in touch with Shane on that, and Mr. Walker himself by phone. So here's what's happened. Is there's almost the exact same case from a county next door that is going before the Supreme Court, their state Supreme Court. So until that decision comes out, everything's on hold.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Oh,
so basically this
everything's on hold.
Huh?
You said everything's on hold, Steve?
Yeah.
Oh,
so
wow.
basically this young man is under the stress from day to day on what's going to happen to him.
Wow.
How that because look, people, the reason it's on hold is because once they make that decision, it's going to create different case law for this type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the other thing people don't understand. And that's why I say, I've had people say, hey, we have the castle doctrine. I'm just going to shoot. And I'm like, well, that's your right. However, just remember, just because you can doesn't mean you should, because there might be a detail in your case where a prosecutor can find case law that they're like, oh, well, that doesn't really imply because we got this other case law. Like, people don't even know what case law is.
Yeah.
No, they just assume from watching HBO it's still 1823 Arizona.
Yeah.
People handle their stuff.
Yeah.
Good luck finding me, Marshall.
Look, and I'll say this to anyone who watches this. You can get Andrew Branca's book, The Law of Self-Defense. If you go to thelawofselfdefense.com, he will send you that book for free. You pay for the shipping. If you're carrying a gun, especially, or you're teaching people, you have to read this book. It's in plain English. It will blow your mind on the stuff that you thought you knew about and you don't know about. And this is from a licensed, legit attorney that's all he's done in his career is self-defense law. He has great podcasts breaking down real cases. You can get a free membership, get access to some. I just have the free one because I'm not paying to go see his stuff that I already, you know what I mean? But other people should. But yeah, it's a great book. Law of Self-Defense. And you can get it from Andrew Branca's website, lawofselfdefense.com. I don't get anything from him. I'm just telling you, I give everybody that book. I recommend it to everybody because it's what they really need. At the very minimum.
Absolutely. Man, it was such a great joy to finally do this live again with you. A different format, obviously. Hey, Paul, being from the other side, being from the LEO, you got any advice to people that just want to pull out their Star Wars phaser and blast away?
I would say don't do it. And if you've never taken a human life, you don't want to. And it just affects your whole life. So
your life will never be the same again, and you will never be the same person again.
Don't think you're fucking Kurt Russell and Tombstone, dude, because that's not how it is. It's just not how it is. I was in law enforcement 25 years. I got in a shootout. I killed somebody, and I still think about it, dude. I still think about it.
Sure.
And it was at least 30 years ago. At least 30 years ago. But
Kyle Rittenhouse's life will never be the same.
Oh my God, Kyle Rittenhouse. So here's a guy. So for me, I was law enforcement, right? So it's a little bit different. But Kyle Rittenhouse will never be the same, dude.
Yeah.
He will never be the same.
Yeah.
Tough topic. I'm glad, obviously, we were professional about it. Listen, I appreciate you guys much. Let's close this one out. I'm sure I'll talk to both of you at some point in time offline. All right?
All right, sounds good. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Did you want to list your website or anything, Steve, before we
No, because it's so out of date. I'm actually finalizing the updated one. It'll be live here in about a week or so, and it'll be way better.
All right, yeah. Send that to me in the back room when you get it, so we can post it on the show.
Yeah, and if you want my contact information, you can get it from Sean. Be happy to collaborate, whatever you need.
Yeah, thank you, brother.
Okay.
Nice.
All right. Yeah, you
awesome,
too.
fellas.
All right, thanks.
Out here.
I don't even know how to turn